Hello, biologists. Today we are going to talk about reproduction, pregnancy, and development. And so I have some kittens and some puppies to start us off. Fun fact, both kittens and puppies are always born with blue eyes, and then that changes over time. First, we have asexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction is great because it's fast, it's easy, it's cheap. You don't have to put a lot of energy into it, like literally calorie energy or time energy. You don't have to go find a mate. And it's really good when you exist in an unchanging environment. So the image being shown is a plant that's doing asexual reproduction. Strawberries do this kind of asexual reproduction really often. They put out a long arm called a stolon or a runner. And at the end of that, they start to develop a whole new plant. The con of asexual reproduction is that there's no genetic diversity. So that bud being shown on the right, it's genetically identical to the parent plant. So if there were a virus that were going to come and wipe out my strawberry plants, it would take all of them because they have the same genetic information. We have a couple different types of asexual reproduction. One is fission, and in fission, a individual, it's often like a bacterium, will live its life and grow and then divide into two. So now you have two individuals. That's a little bit different than budding. I have two images here showing you budding, one in yeast and one in hydra. In budding, instead of just splitting into two, you produce a little outgrowth, and then that outgrowth develops into a new individual. So it's not just mitosis, it's a developmental thing. So here is a budding yeast cell. Here, the hydra are creating buds off the side. So there's two buds. These will detach and they will become separate individuals, separate organisms. The parental organism is older and more mature. So it's not starting again with two, it's a parent and two children. But those children are genetically identical. So again, the same kind of cons. We also have fragmentation. Fragmentation is where you break a part of your body off and it then grows into a new individual. Lichen do this, some fungi can do this, and some sea stars can do this. One of its type of sea stars being shown right here, the 3 and 3 sea star, it can just break its arms off and then its arms develop into a new sea star. So that's pretty rad. That's fragmentation. We also have parthenogenesis. Parthenogenesis is when an unfertilized egg just starts to do mitosis and grows into a new individual. So almost like it's a zygote, but it never fused with a gamete. It never fused with sperm. This is really common in bugs. So aphids reproduce using parthenogenesis really commonly. We also have gynogenesis and androgenesis. That's when gametes are used, but you only use the genetic information from one of them, either the sperm or the egg. So there's fusion in gametes, but the information isn't mixed like it is in a usual zygote. You have the fusion happen, you have fertilization occur, but only mom's DNA or only dad's DNA is used. And then you're creating genetic clones of mom or dad, and you have the same cons for doing asexual reproduction. I've got two videos on parthenogenesis for you to watch. They are both incredible. I hope you enjoy them. That brings us to sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is exciting because you get genetic diversity, right? My offspring are not the same as me. You are not the same as your parents. It's good in unstable, changing environments. So if you don't know what's going to happen next year, if there's going to be a forest fire or an outbreak of a pathogen, that's really nice to have genetic diversity. The cons, it's expensive, like time and calories. If you look at this beautiful rhododendron being shown right here, our Pacific rhododendron, think about all the effort that took into growing this tissue. This is a lot of mitosis, all this pigment, that's expensive. That's a lot of effort. So your plant is really being spendy producing these flowers. It's also slower. I have to produce all these flowers as a rhododendron, but then I need to wait and hope I get pollinated. It can be difficult, like if you do sexually reproduce, maybe not all of your offspring will make it, And sometimes it can be deadly or dangerous. I'm thinking specifically here of spiders, which are going to sometimes practice sexual cannibalism, in which the female will kill and eat her male after she mates with him. We'll talk about that in ecology next term because it does serve a purpose. But then you're choosing reproduce or live. It's one or the other. Another thing that's difficult is you have to find a mate. So for this rhododendron, its mate is brought to it in the form of pollen on a bee. But think about something like an elk. Elk have these giant antlers. They go through rut. They have to scream to find a mate. They have to fight the other males to find a mate. And then usually it's one or two mates or one or two males that win the rights to all the females. So if you are a smaller male and your rack is smaller and you're not as smelly and you're not as loud, the women might not be interested in mating with you, and then you don't get to reproduce that season. So finding a mate can be really difficult. And again, in this instance, competition for mates can be deadly as well. You could fight to the death for an access to a female or a male. In sexual reproduction, fertilization can be external or internal. Animals are going to produce gametes, those are sperm and egg, in specialized organs called gonads. In males, those are testes, they produce sperm. In females, those are ovaries, they produce eggs. Lots of animals are hermaphroditic, meaning they can produce both sperm and egg. And then copulation is the sexual union that's going to let fertilization occur. So I have a picture of a Douglas squirrel's testes for you. And a Douglas squirrel's testes actually increase in size during mating season because of the flood of testosterone in their body. Invertebrates are going to produce eggs, and those eggs are made in ovaries. So we are still using our ovaries, we're still using our gonads, and we're still going to have fertilization occur. But this time we're going to talk a little bit about metamorphosis. So here at the top, I have an adult female mosquito. This female mosquito has a sucking nose, like a proboscis, that she will use to stab a mammal and drink some of her blood. She needs blood because she needs the iron and all the nutrients to form her eggs. Male mosquitoes do not bite people. They drink nectar. And so if you've ever been bit by a mosquito, it's a female searching for your blood so it can produce eggs. Fertilization will occur, and this female mosquito will then lay her eggs in the water. Those eggs will hatch into the larvae that you've probably seen in a bucket or a lake floating before. Larvae do not feed on blood. They don't have the apparatus to stab someone and take blood. Instead, larvae themselves are filter feeders. So they're eating algae, they're eating bacteria. They're then going to change their body form. This is metamorphosis. They'll turn into a pupa. They'll shed that exoskeleton, turn into their adult form, and then go searching for blood so that they can have the nutrients that they need to make their eggs again. So it's interesting that not only does their body change completely, their life cycle and their feeding systems change as well. Here we have a damselfly. Damselflies are incredible. They're really beautiful. They look a lot like dragonflies. The difference is how they hold their wings, and that's about it. So it's wing differences. So this damselfly here, this is an adult male. Adult male damselflies are fascinating because they have two sets of genitalia. This primary genitalia is where your male is going to make his sperm. He takes his sperm and he puts it into a little packet, and then he has to transfer his sperm packet to the secondary genitalia where the female will pick it up. So she's going to grab it from here, not where it's produced. To do that, he's going to arch his lower abdomen over and deposit his sperm packet right here. He's then going to find a female, so he'll fly around, they'll do a mating dance, really beautiful, and then he finds a female that's willing to mate with him. He's going to take his lower abdomen, hold onto her neck, and arch his lower abdomen up, exposing his secondary genitalia where the sperm packet is. The female will take her abdomen, she will arch it under and she will receive the sperm packet. She's going to grab it from him. This is called the wheel mating position or the heart mating position because it kind of looks like a heart. So if you've seen dragonflies attached to each other like this, that's what's going on. She's grabbing the sperm packet. Now she's going to take that sperm packet, she's going to fertilize her eggs, and when she's ready to lay her eggs, she's going to lay them right below the water level on some kind of substrate like a stick. As she's doing that, the male keeps attachment to her neck, and he hovers over her like this, and he will fight off anyone that's going to try and A, reproduce with her, or B, harm the eggs. So this is a protective position while she's laying her eggs. Those eggs will then hatch, they will develop into larvae. The larvae are going to live in water. They're little tiny predators in water. They stay in the water for usually 2 to 3 years, but up to 5. And then they will emerge, they'll crawl up out of the water onto a stick. They will do their molting. They will hatch out of their exoskeleton into their adult form, and the entire life cycle will start again. So this is a big, long, expensive process, but the benefit is your offspring are separate. They are genetically different from both parents. Now we have egg laying. Egg laying is fascinating. If you lay eggs, we say you are oviparous. And in birds, you have your reproductive system. Birds have one opening for everything, for feces, for mating, and for their eggs to come out. It's called the cloaca. And so inside this reproductive system, we're going to have an ovary. The ovary is going to produce oocytes. Those oocytes are the eggs. They're going to be released into the infundibulum, which is the catching area of the uterus. They're going to move down the uterine tract into this area. There's no shell here. This is where fertilization occurs in the magnum. Once this is fertilized, it'll continue down. It starts to form that thicker membrane. It reorganizes into an egg shape. It gets its shell deposited. And then your egg that is fertilized and will hatch eventually into a new chicken is released out the cloaca. Now, most birds, male birds, don't have penises. Like 97% of birds don't have a penis. And so for the sperm to get from their cloaca, the male cloaca, to the female cloaca, they do what they call the cloacal kiss, and they just smash their cloaca together, and he sends sperm through to her uterus. So it's a smushing instead of a penetration. We also think this is how dinosaurs probably mated, because dinosaurs are also reptiles like birds are reptiles. And so they think that dinosaurs probably did not have penises either and would do the cloacal kiss. We're going to have internal and external fertilization. If you have external fertilization, it's ovulipary. And if you have internal, it's zygoparity. So think zygote inside. If you have live birth, we call you viviparous. So viviparous means that the embryo fully develops inside the mother, usually in the uterus or equivalent, and that the mother's body provides nourishment. This is mammals, but also some cartilaginous fish like sharks and a couple reptiles, so not just mammals. And we also have placental mammals as one of the options for this. And placental mammals no longer use an egg shell, whether leathery or crunchy like a bird. We also have monotremes and marsupials, so those aren't the only options for mammals. All 3 of those are mammals. We're going to now discuss human reproductive organs and human pregnancy and development. So get ready. Here are the male reproductive organs. Here's what they look like. This is a sperm. You have the tail, which is a flagella that helps it swim. You have the neck, which is its articulation point. You have the nucleus that contains the genetic information. And you have the acrosome. That's a layer on the head of the sperm that contains digestive enzymes that allows the sperm to bore into the egg for fertilization to occur. Here's a cross-section of a male reproductive system. We have the testes right here inside of the skin called the scrotum. The testes are where we're going to have sperm produced in the seminiferous tubules. So there's a bunch of different types of cells we're going to talk about in just a second involved in this. Then it's going to move up these tubes. These are called the vas deferens. It's going to come through to these different types of glands like the seminal vesicle and the bulbourethral gland. They're going to produce the fluids involved, and then sperm will leave through the penis during ejaculation and, in theory, swim toward an egg and fertilize the egg. There are millions of sperm in each ejaculation, and only one will get to fertilize the egg. So it's a very competitive system. Here are the female reproductive organs. And here they are on a person. So we have a cross-section of a human again. This is the ventral side. This is the dorsal side. So this is a butt. You have the external genitalia, which is going to be the clitoris and the labia, majora and minora. And in here, you also have the urethra that attaches to the bladder. That's not part of the reproductive system, but it's in there. Then you're going to have the vagina that connects to the uterus. Here's the uterus. The opening to the uterus is called the cervix. If we look at it from the front, here is the vagina, the opening to the uterus called the cervix. Here's the uterus. And then now we get to see the ovaries. They're not at the midline, so we don't get to see them in a mid-sagittal section. So here you have the ovaries. There's these blue things. The ovaries are where we're going to have follicles developing eggs. Eggs will be released during ovulation. They're going to float into these little oviducts, which are also called fallopian tubes. And those fallopian tubes will take the eggs down to the uterus to implant, and then pregnancy will begin. We regulate our production of gametes, eggs, and sperm using hormones. Our hypothalamus is really the control center. The hypothalamus is this smooth area in the brain right above the pituitary gland. So here's your hypothalamus. It's below the thalamus, so hypo, below. Here is the full brain, so we can see where it is about, right at the base of the cerebrum. And the hypothalamus is going to produce gonadotropin-releasing hormone. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone will tell the anterior pituitary to make follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Both of those will get pumped into your blood. It'll go everywhere because it's in your blood, but only the cells that have receptors will respond. The cells that have receptors are going to be your gonads. In males, follicle-stimulating hormone is going to enter the testes. It's going to be received from the blood using receptors, and it's going to stimulate Sertoli cells to begin producing sperm, a process called spermatogenesis. Luteinizing hormone is also going to be received by the testes, and it's going to stimulate Leydig cells, and they're going to produce the release of testosterone. So we're increasing sperm, we're increasing testosterone. This is a negative feedback system. That means that the response negates the stimuli. So if you're increasing these levels as you produce sperm, it's going to decrease these levels, and then it's going to cycle back on and off. So you're going to like teeter-totter higher low levels of testosterone as you produce sperm. In females, addition to follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, we're also going to use estrogens and progesterones. They're going to be released from the follicle themselves. So this is inside the ovaries. Estrogen is going to assist with endometrial growth and ovulation and calcium absorption. And it also helps give secondary sex characteristics, which are physical appearances that look feminine. That's things like breasts and hips and fat distribution. Progesterone is also going to assist in regrowing your endometrium, and it's also going to inhibit the release of luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone using inhibin. Estradiol, which is a form of estrogen, produces secondary sex characteristics as well. So I have this pig that is feeding her offspring, and you can see her enlarged mammary glands. So that's an example of a secondary sex characteristic in female. Both estradiol and progesterone help regulate the menstrual cycle. What is the menstrual cycle? Let's discuss. So we have two things that are going to happen. We have what's going on in your uterus, and we have what's going on in your ovaries. So let's talk about your ovaries first. Your ovarian cycle has two phases: the follicular cycle, which is when you're getting your egg ready to release, and the luteal phase, which is when you're reversing the process. So in the follicular phase, you're going to have a follicle, and it's going to start growing and developing an egg, making the egg mature and ready. That follicle is then going to rupture, and it's going to eject the egg. That's called ovulation. This egg is now going to move down into the oviduct, into the fallopian tubes, and it may or may not become fertilized. After you've released the egg, what's left of the follicle kind of swells up and turns yellow. Luteum means yellow. Corpus luteum is what we call this now. And then we're going to start to degenerate it, and it's going to eventually be reabsorbed. So that's the luteal phase. At the same time, we have things going on with your uterus. So your uterine cycle is in 3 steps: the menstrual phase, where you're having a period; the proliferation phase, where you're growing your uterus, growing your endometrium; and then the secretory phase, where it's getting ready to be schlepped off. So in the menstrual phase, and all of these uterine cycles always start with menstruation, your endometrium is being shed, and so that comes out via the vagina as blood and chunks and mucus. Then you're going to start to regrow the endometrium. We're going to regrow the endometrium because we want a nice place for the fertilized egg to implant, and that's going to begin developing the placenta in the embryo and then lead to pregnancy. So in the secretory phase, your egg has been released, ovulation has occurred. This is when implantation could occur. It could implant into the endometrium. If it does not, then your endometrium starts to release itself and it is shed. That's your menstruation. So it's like producing a happy home for your zygotes, but then if no zygote implants, you wreck it all and then you start over again every month. Here are our hormone levels that are associated. Up on top, this is associated with the ovulation cycle in the ovaries. These are pituitary hormones. So they're produced by the anterior pituitary, controlled by your hypothalamus. We can see that we have a little bit of a rise and then a dip. And then right when ovulation occurs, follicle stimulating hormone is going to spike and then decrease again. Similar process with luteinizing hormone. We're going to have a spike for ovulation, and then we're going to decrease again. So those two are really involved in producing a viable, mature egg. Your ovarian hormones, produced by the ovaries themselves, are going to increase over your cycle. Your estradiol is going to spike with ovulation, and then it's going to decrease, and then it's going to increase again as your endometrium is swelling and getting ready for implantation, and decrease as menstruation starts to occur. Day 0 is during the menstrual phase. So this is when the period is occurring. Progesterone is going to be low up until your endometrium is being swollen and ready for implantation. So it's building up the endometrium in the intent to have a nice place for the zygote to implant, and then will decrease again, leading to menstruation on day 29, which is day 0. All right, here is your ovary. This is your uterus. This is your fallopian tube. We have all of our stages occurring. This is the whole structure shown. So we're zoomed in here. This is the vagina, that's the cervix. In your ovary, you have follicles. They are immature. Each of these little follicles will start to develop. It'll grow. It'll have a maturing egg inside of it, and then it will eventually rupture, and it will eject that egg called an oocyte. So this is the fimbriae of the fallopian tube. That means little fingers. It's going to eject it into the space and then it will move into the fallopian tube to go down to your uterus. So here's an egg ready to be fertilized. Now that the follicle has ruptured, what's left of it, what was making that egg mature, it swells up and it turns yellow. That's what luteum means. So this is the corpus luteum. And then it's going to start to degenerate and it's going to get reabsorbed. So this is your ovary cycle, your ovarian cycle here. Now we have our little egg. Our little egg is ready to be fertilized. Here's the sperm. Fertilization usually occurs in the fallopian tubes. It'll swim toward the egg. It'll use those digestive enzymes on its tip to power through, and then you will have a zygote. A zygote is the fusion of the nuclei from mom and dad. That little zygote is going to travel down toward the uterus. As it goes, it's going to divide via mitosis. So day 2, it's 2 cells, then it turns into 4 cells, then 8 cells. By day 5, it's a blastocyte. That means that it's a hollow ball made of cells. And then day 8 or 9, after fertilization, that's when implantation occurs. This is your endometrium right here. It's nice and thick. It's ready for a zygote to implant. It's going to implant, and the place where these two touch will develop into your placenta. Here's the same process, but we're only showing the zygote now. Here's my zygote. Does mitosis once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, until you have a blastocyte. Here's your blastocyte. If we cut this in half, we see that it has an empty space inside called a blastosole or cule. And then you have the outer layer of cells called the blastoderm. After that, we're going to start to get a little push in here. So here's our little pocket that's being created. That's our blastopore. So this is our gastrula now. And that blastopore will either develop into a mouth or an anus, giving us protostomes or deuterostomes. This is an animation of human development. You can see the weeks increasing and the size increasing. All right, so cool. Here's another visual that's not moving. This is embryo development. The stages are not the weeks. The stages are numbers based on size categories. So this says 18, that's definitely not 18 weeks. An average pregnancy is 40 weeks. So that would be almost halfway cooked. And this is definitely not halfway cooked. This is only 44-ish days. These stages of development are really fascinating, really interesting. And we used to think there was this process called ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. And what that means is the stages that an embryo goes through as it develops recreate its evolutionary history. So we totally believed this for a while. It's not really supported any longer. We don't think it's true, but it is quite interesting that as we're developing, the first set of embryos here, the first stage of all these different types of organisms, are basically indistinguishable. The second development stage, still, there's differences definitely between the fish and the salamander and everybody else, but you couldn't really tell a calf from a rabbit from a human. It's not until later in development that we start to see the physical traits that determine these organisms. So we don't believe this idea anymore, but it is pretty incredible that we do follow such a similar process. Now let's discuss pregnancy. So pregnancy is when your embryo has attached, you're developing a little baby human, and it is being called a fetus. I said a little baby human, but this is true for a cat as well. So here I have the mother. This is the mother's tissue. This is going to be skin and muscle, stomach, all of this. Inside, you're going to have the uterus. And then inside the uterus, you're going to have the placenta, and you're going to have the amnion, and you're going to have the space around the infant here. All of this is going to help protect the baby. The amniotic fluid is all liquid, so we still develop in water. It's just water retained inside a mother. Then you have the umbilical cord, and the umbilical cord attaches to the placenta. This part where the blood vessels are shown is the placenta. Let's zoom in on the placenta here. This is the umbilical cord. The umbilical cord connects to the developing fetus, and it's going to bring in all the nutrients and oxygen it needs, and it's also going to get rid of the waste. So the umbilical cord is how this baby gets food and how it breathes. As this thing is developing, it doesn't have functional lungs. Right before birth, fetuses do have functional lungs, and they will practice breathing inside, breathing in this amniotic fluid. So here, this is going to be the amniotic fluid, and you're going to have the amnion lining it. So this is the amnion right here lining it. Then you're going to have umbilical tissue and your fetus's veins and arteries. These are going to branch into basically capillaries, which we call chorionic villi. And those are going to get really close to touching mom's arteries and veins. So these are mom's arteries and veins as well. The maternal supply is going to give oxygen, get rid of carbon dioxide, bring in nutrients, and all of this is within the uterus. When we are having labor, that means that we are about to deliver the baby. Labor occurs in 3 steps. Stage 1 is contractions. During contractions, the cervix is going to dilate. That's going to need to get a lot bigger for the baby to get through. In stage 2, you're going to have pushing and birth. This is called the crowning of the head, where the head starts to come through the cervix. Their baby's full body will come through next. And then the last step of delivery is delivery of the placenta. So the placenta will detach, and it will also need to come out. It needs to be removed. And this is a delicate process. You want to make sure that you don't tear anything because the placenta is attached to the mother's tissues, and there's a huge amount of blood supply in here. This is one of our few examples of a positive feedback loop. So in our stage 1 of labor, your contractions are squeezing your uterus down, and that forces the baby's head into the cervix. As the baby's head is forced into the cervix, it tells the brain to start releasing oxytocin, and oxytocin forces the uterus to contract more, which pushes on the cervix, which causes more stimulus to be sent to the brain, which produces more oxytocin. So in a positive feedback loop, the stimulus, the pressure on the cervix, is exaggerated by the reaction. In a negative feedback loop, it's negated by the reaction. So as your cervix is pushed on, your uterus contracts, which pushes on your cervix, which causes your uterus to contract. So this will continue and continue and continue and accelerate until you have your baby be born. And then the stimulus is gone, so the process stops. We have several different types of birth control to try and regulate when we get pregnant. There are 3 main categories. One is a barrier. That would be something like a condom, but this also includes a diaphragm and the spermicide, things that you can use to kill sperm before they fertilize an egg. We have hormonal birth controls. That is the patch, the ring, also the shots, and the IUD, intrauterine device, the implant. There's also an implant that you can get like in your arm. So it's like a little plastic rod, so it doesn't have to go in the uterus. So your implant can be in different locations. And then there's other options, natural family planning, sterilization, and withdrawal. Over here, we have the failure rate over a 1-year period of time. You'll note that using barriers is 15 to 24% failure rate. That's often user error, but it's also things like physics. Things could get poked out of the way or slip off, stuff like that. It happens. Hormonal birth control has the lowest failure rate, with implants being the most effective. Family planning, except for sterilization, these other options tend to have the highest failure rate, and that's just what it is. So be aware. Thing to note, none of these prevent STIs, sexually transmitted infections, except for physical barriers like condoms or dental dams. So a physical barrier that prevents touch is the only thing that can help prevent STIs, besides for other ways to prevent STIs, which we're going to talk about in a second. Here is a diagram, a diagram from the Centers for Disease Control. It has the STI information from 2024. Go ahead and take a moment to read that. So some good news and bad news. Chlamydia and gonorrhea are going down, and that's great news because those are the number 1 and 2 most common sexually transmitted infections. Syphilis is increasing. That's not great. So what about those 2 most common? Chlamydia is the most common. There's 1.5 million cases a year. 50 to 75% of people who have chlamydia do not develop symptoms, and that means they might not know they have chlamydia. It's caused by a bacteria. Gonorrhea, which is often called the clap, it's the second most common. There's about 1 million cases a year. About half the folks that get gonorrhea do not have symptoms and may not know that they have it. And it's also caused by a bacteria. Because these things are bacterial, they can be treated, so that's great. Here are our tips to lower your risk of getting a sexually transmitted infection. The only 100% way to not get one is to not have sex. But if you're going to have sex, use a physical barrier like a condom. That will absolutely help. Choose a partner wisely as an option. That means that someone that you think will be keeping you safe as much as you're keeping them safe. Try to avoid drugs and alcohol, which lead to risky behaviors. Learn the symptoms of infection so you know what's normal, what's not normal, and you can go get tested or go get treatment if you catch an STI. And then even if you don't feel like you have a symptom, because 50 to 75% of people with chlamydia don't, it's still really important to get checked for STIs regularly if you are sexually active. The other most common types of STIs are listed here. If any of these are unfamiliar to you, please Google them. CDC is a great source. The Mayo Clinic is a great source. There's lots of information out online, but make sure that you're looking at a reputable website. So something that you can find trustworthy. We can always use the CRAP test to double check whether or not something is trustworthy. And then where to get tested. So Multnomah County has testing services. So do Oregon Health Authority. Planned Parenthood offers testing, and there's lots of testing online, many of them for free. So please take care of yourself, be safe. I hope this was interesting. If you have any questions, email me, and we'll talk soon. Have a good day.